Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel again. If you like what you're going to hear today, please click the subscribe button below and you'll have access to many more interesting videos with interesting guests. Today, I am really thrilled to have Melissa Deering and Chris Schulte with Smith Gambrelle, who practice exclusively in the area of immigration for Smith Gambrelle with offices throughout the country, and they can tell me that a little later where they're located. We're going to have a great conversation today on the economic impact of immigration. In other words, what happens if immigrants all of a sudden stop? We're going to talk about certain myths and then tell you the facts. You can decide for yourself. Melissa and Chris, thank you for joining. Melissa, start by telling us a little bit about your background, and then we'll move with you, Chris.
Sure. Thanks, Rudy, for having us on the conversation. My name again is Melissa Deering, and I'm a partner with the law firm of Smith Gambrelle Russell here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I practice exclusively in the area of business immigration, primarily doing H-1B work, handling perm-based green cards, and other types of immigration matters for professionals. I've been practicing here for about 20 years.
Now, here is Jacksonville, Florida, right?
Jacksonville, Florida.
A good place to be right now amid the winter storms, right?
Absolutely.
Chris, on the other hand, is not so fortunate. Chris, can you tell us where you're located and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm Chris Schulte. I'm in the Washington, D.C. office of Smith Gambrelle Russell. So a little bit further north, a little more snow, but not as bad as our New York office. So can't complain too much.
Have you been snowed in?
No, we got a couple inches, but then it melted pretty quickly. But the drivers here are a little bit less used to it, so a little bit of snow goes a long way to causing havoc.
I lived in St. Louis for 30 years, and you get an inch of snow, an inch of freezing rain. They canceled all the schools, and you always had to make alternate arrangements.
I grew up in New Hampshire and Maine, so a couple feet of snow is sort of a usual week this time of year. But hope everybody's doing okay up there. So I've been in DC. I went to law school here and then moved back north and then came back here. So I've been practicing in general for a little over 20 years. Also now doing business immigration. My focus is a little bit more on seasonal or temporary work. And so that's the H-2A and H-2B program in the agricultural, non-agricultural sectors, respectively. And so dovetailing that with what Melissa does on the longer term or kind of more trained, more people with larger educational background in those programs.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is that what you see mostly in the media is the emotional impact of immigration. You see those who were very pro, those who were completely anti, and they seem to treat it as a social issue. They don't necessarily treat it as a, as an economic issue. And I think immigration is more economic than it is social. If we go to one side of the other, and then we take one extreme, for example, there are people who believe just open the borders and you can come in. Okay. And other people say, let's limit it. And the reasons they say let's limit it is because there are these myths about what, quote, these people, for lack of a better word, that's how they refer to these people, are being classified. Now, I understand you work in the area of business immigration. You may have done some family immigration, but I think the heart of this conversation has to do, what are the business aspects of the immigration? And what would happen, Melissa, if there was no immigration at all?
I think employers would suffer significantly. Let's look at the economy right now. We went from pre-pandemic unemployment rates of about 3% in the computer and mathematical occupation area to 1.5% in August of 2021. So the unemployment rate for IT workers has plummeted significantly. And right now, there's a huge demand for those types of professionals. And yet we're very limited in terms of the number of H-1Bs that are available each year. I think it would have a significant impact on employers, both in attracting talent and on the economy overall.
Well, the big question or the big myth is these people are coming in and taking our jobs. They're taking our jobs, and that's why homegrown Americans don't have work opportunities. Now, Chris, you're in the temporary worker area.
Mhm.
Is that myth true?
It isn't. I mean, these are jobs that people here either don't have the training to do, like in the higher tech jobs that Melissa was mentioning, or just aren't as interested in doing. The goal for most people is to find year-round work. The trend now, people, when they're raising their children, they want them to go to school, get a college degree, kind of work in offices, do work like that. They don't want them to necessarily be, picking strawberries or doing landscaping work. And so, but that work still needs to be done here. So having access to a pool of labor that is willing to do that and is enthusiastic to do that. I mean, the wages that are being paid are above average here, but are life-changing for other parts of the world where people will come here, still have family there, work here for a period of time, and then go home and bring that money home and be able to take care of their family and send their kids on to be educated and so forth.
Well, that's some other misinformation that's being passed around, as we hire these people for less. When the reality of it is, for professional workers, computer IT geeks that we bring in, and temporary workers, you have to pay them a prevailing wage. What's fair under the circumstances, correct?
That's correct, Rudy. So you have to pay the prevailing wage or the actual wage, whichever's greater. So the Department of Labor publishes new prevailing wage data each year. And what you do is you compare that prevailing wage amount contained in the Department of Labor's data to what the company normally pays individuals with the same or similar expertise, and you have to pay the higher of either of those wages. And sometimes the prevailing wage data is significantly higher. So it's not necessarily cheaper, or it isn't cheaper, to hire H-1B workers as opposed to U.S. workers.
Well, in fact, it's actually more expensive to hire.
Right.
I think if you ask an employer what's their preference, to hire foreign-born workers or to hire, U.S. citizen-born workers, they would obviously say we prefer to hire citizen-born workers, not because I think there's a discrimination against it, but it's less of a cost.
Sure, it's less of a cost. It's less of an administrative burden having to track each of these workers and ensure that you're timely renewing their employment authorization. So the preference would be for employers to hire U.S. born workers. The cost for H-1B sponsorship is significant. The filing fees alone total almost $2,500. That doesn't count the attorney's fees investment.
Right. So the employers are doing this necessarily because there aren't enough domestic workers to fill the positions. We have to go outside the U.S. And of course, there's a cost to processing it. And because our processing is probably more cumbersome than many other countries, that's what adds to the expense.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
And Chris, with your practice, I hear this quite a bit about these people are sneaking over the border, and they mostly refer to the Mexicans. And by the way, the reality is that the majority of undocumented workers fly and not cross the river. They're here through some type of tourist visa and overstay. But let's just talk about somebody sneaking over the border, okay?
Mm-hmm.
They go through great expense. They pay unscrupulous people certain fees. They risk their life. There's danger. If we allowed more workers to come in on a temporary basis, you would eliminate the need for the term coyote. People could come, live openly, know that they go back to Mexico, Guatemala, wherever they're from for a certain period of time, and not be hidden, correct? But we're limited in numbers of the number of temporary workers we can bring in.
I think that's right. Yeah, for some of the programs, for H-2A, for the agricultural program, there's no cap on it currently. Some of the proposals in Congress have included limiting that, but that's a program that's grown quite a bit as the people crossing the border illegally has cut down. There's actually been a net outflow of people going from the U.S. to Mexico over the last several years. And the people that are here that have stayed on this side of the border because they have families here, they've had children that are U.S. citizens, have been, getting older or aging out of day-to-day fieldwork in agriculture. So the growing need to kind of fill that has come through legal immigration, which is, is not capped. But for the other programs, it is, and they've, for example, for H-2B, which is landscaping, hospitality, restaurants, construction, kind of everything that's not agricultural. They had a drawing or kind of a filing period for visas for the period starting from April 1 through the end of the year. And there were, I think, 4 times as many requested as were available. So, I mean, the demand for this is huge, and these are jobs that will go unfilled if they can't bring them in. And so these are people that have tried to do things the right way, that are going through the system correctly. They're not looking to hire people, without work authorization. They want to hire people and then let them go home to their families and kind of provide this, what they call cyclical migration, that they would come work and then go home and then have this kind of recurring period.
Well, it'll also prevent employers from taking advantage of these workers, making them work 14-hour days and paying them only $1,000 a month. Having to live in an apartment with 5 or 6 other families just to save money because they also have to send money home. I think it'll eliminate some of that too. It'll eliminate, I think, employer abuse. Now, in the corporate world, business immigration, we don't see it as much or hardly at all because the guidelines are strict on what the prevailing wage is. But even then, the numbers are not staggering. So, Melissa, isn't the cap about 85,000 now of people we can get in?
Yes, that's correct. And this past fiscal year, USCIS received over 300,000 registrations. So, more than 220,000 above the cap. So there's most certainly a demand for these workers right now, given that every fiscal year the cap's been exceeded significantly.
So of 300 and some thousand workers, we're only going to take 85,000. And yet the need for IT and technical workers is really great.
Absolutely. I mean, between, I believe, March and September of 2021, there was an addition of over 1.2 million jobs just in the IT sector that are unfilled. We need H-1B workers right now to fill these roles. There's not enough U.S. workers available.
Well, I think that part of the problem is people's misunderstanding of these numbers. It's not like people are coming in droves and taking these jobs.
Correct. And, a lot of the foreign nationals that we work with, attend our U.S. universities. So they're making significant investments in our U.S. schools. And, they're attending school in a non-immigrant status. And when they graduate, they're looking for jobs like everyone else. And they're going, like Chris mentioned, with respect to his foreign national client population, they're going through the process the right way. They're doing it legally. There's just not enough H-1B numbers available, yet there's plenty of jobs available. There's a definite need for H-1B workers right now.
So the answer is really to lessen the hurdles.
I agree.
Allowing people to come in and perhaps relax the requirements for people coming in.
Absolutely. And, it's fine to have procedures in place to ensure that there's no employer abuse, because you're always going to have instances where employers don't utilize the program correctly. So, it's fine if the government implements specific processes or requirements, but to have an absolute cap on the number of non-immigrant workers without taking into account what the economy's demands are doesn't seem reasonable.
That's what's so frustrating, is that they, in the test, for example, in the H-2 programs, they look to see whether bringing a foreign worker here would adversely affect the wages or working conditions of a U.S. worker. That's what they're specifically testing. The recruitment requirements, they go through a whole process, and only if they get to the end of that and no U.S. workers have come forward to take the job, only then, as a last resort, can you hire them. So they'll go through that process. They'll require this proof, but then say, we agree you have a need for it. We agree that there will be no harm to the U.S. workers, but we don't care because there's a cap. And so, even though it's the right thing to do, there's an artificial limit. And so you're just going to have to close your business. I'm sorry.
Well, let's talk about the myth that says immigrants are a drain on the economy and reducing immigration would make the economy stronger. So there are some interesting numbers with that. And the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine put out basically information on this. Immigrants added $2 trillion to the U.S. gross domestic product, GDP, in 2016, and $458 billion to state and local and federal taxes. That is a lot of money.
It is, and our clients contribute every day to state, federal, and local taxes. They make a significant impact on the economy, not only in paying their fair share of taxes, but think about it from the perspective of, as well, of the jobs that some of them create here. Some of them are opening up their own businesses, and they're employing multiple people. And if we have restrictive immigration, they never have the opportunity to do that. We lose out on job creation.
Well, if you take out and eliminate immigration altogether, it's estimated that we are left with a reduction of $1.2 trillion. In other words, that's how much less will be contributed into the economy. And decreasing the GDP by, say, 2% over 20 years will shrink growth by 12.5% and cut 4.6 million jobs. Most of the people affected would be people in, the Rust Belt and other industries who rely on immigrants to do the work, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I know, Melissa, you had some numbers. Chris, you also wanted to say something on that.
No, I was just going to say that it affects different sectors differently. As there's some industries where, like, the legal profession is largely domestic born. There's some industries that would feel that in different ways. Agriculture is overwhelmingly foreign born nationals. At some point, they'd been people that had crossed in, without authorization. More and more that is made up of people coming here on visas. So the loss of that means that the production would have to move overseas. And so, rather than buying U.S. grown apples, if there's nobody here to harvest them, you're going to have to purchase them from another country and so forth. And so in a lot of these, having the key people in place means that you can hire, one foreign, one visa creates 2, 3, 4, 5 additional U.S. jobs while they're here. So it's not only not taking jobs, it's actually contributing to the growth of these jobs.
Especially when they're entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
And they open a restaurant, they employ 20 people. They're here with, I think, a mindset to work. I mean, many of you have teenage kids and you say, cut my grass, and they don't want to. Mm-hmm. But you've got this poor guy that comes in, he's cutting 10 lawns that day because he needs the money. I think the other myth is that immigrants are poorly educated. And that in reality is the farthest thing from the truth. So Melissa, for example, in the H-1Bs, They're generally people with a college degree or master's degree or even higher, right?
Well, and that's one of the requirements for the H-1B. You have to demonstrate that the position requires and the individual holds at least a bachelor's degree in a specific field, or its equivalent. So in that context, equivalency could only be met by showing that an individual has 3 years of experience for each missing year of education. We do a lot of H-1B work, and I can tell you that the vast majority of our clients have a bachelor's. They're not, or higher. They're not qualifying merely by the equivalency. They're very highly educated. And, probably the vast majority of our foreign national clients hold at least a master's degree in their specialty.
Now, Chris, in your world, you're going to have workers that aren't so educated, let's say. Some maybe barely have a 6th grade education if they're going to work in the fields, but they're performing services for which you do not need a degree for, yet we have nobody that can fill those services. But the point I want to make with that is a number of these immigrants, from what I've seen, the ones I've known, and my stories are anecdotal, have a strong belief in education. So these temporary workers may come in, but they're not, but their children are going to be educated. Their children are going to set up the businesses.
That's right. No, and that's the part of the other side of the coin. The part of the immigration story we don't see is what happens in the country where the people are coming from, in their hometown, in their village, being able to send money back and educate, their children, their siblings, their cousins, nieces and nephews. So, people that, for example, there a number of, most of the sheep herders that care for kind of the, the wool producers, or, the herds of sheep in the Mountain West, are from Peru currently. They have that experience of kind of being at altitude and kind of, working that industry. So sending the money home, the ranchers will go visit them, and a lot of them will be, their godparents or their workers' children when they go visit them. But they see people that are kind of, oh, these people were able to go to college. They're the doctor now in our village. They got this education because of the money that I was able to send home through my work in the U.S. in a way that it wouldn't have been possible at the time. For years, the agricultural workers on the East Coast were largely coming from the West Indies, from Jamaica. And so when we talked to people at the Ministry of Labor there, they said a lot of their middle class was built on work that was done here. When people are young, they were able to send enough money back that they can kind of get that education, start businesses, kind of learn those skills and develop it, so that they can, have that wealth, have that, kind of knowledge, but kind of actual capital, in order to grow their economy back in the home countries. And so it becomes sort of, it's good policy. It creates good neighbors, and kind of people think very highly of the United States and these countries in a way that isn't necessarily universal around the world.
A good example of the dream kids, the dreamer kids. I had the good fortune of hosting some of them in St. Louis. Some of these are kids, again, children of immigrants, undocumented individuals who get accepted to med school but can't go because they're not documented, who are stuck working maybe as a janitor, or maybe don't even get to go to college, although they're exceptionally bright, because their immigration situation is not resolved. So, I mean, the dreamer issue is a totally separate issue, but it goes to the point we're talking about, and that is the unskilled workers that come here seem to realize, for the most part, the value of an education. Now, there are people, my honest, who may take exception with that because they know people in certain neighborhoods. I'm not talking about the gangbangers in LA. I'm not talking about any. I'm just talking about your person that comes in, who's chasing the American dream and wants it for him, and then wants it for his children or her children. And so that's a good, really, example of what many of the immigrants want to do, wouldn't you say?
I think that's right. No, and that's just sort of being able to make those distinctions between kind of people that are to qualify for dreamer status. You have to have, the clean criminal record, have pursued education, or joined the armed forces. Kind of done the things that we want to see people doing wherever they're born to kind of move up in American society. For example, and that has very bipartisan support in Congress. There's a lot of people that think these people are exactly the ones that we think should get a shot. They came here not through their choice. We've defined it to be people that came below a certain age. They were brought here by their parents, not because they wanted to. But even with the farm workers, the most recent bill to pass the House was that there were people that had been here working in agriculture, without legal status for a certain amount of time. And so they're going to be, at this point, the supervisors, the crew leaders, kind of they've learned the job. They're running the show for all intents and purposes. They have a path that they can get right with the law, that, you're going to pay a penalty, you're going to get back on track, pay your taxes, that you can get that status and eventually over enough time, get that green card. Part two of that was that they would improve this kind of future flow program, that as they tighten up the border, there would be the ability to have workers come here on a temporary basis, like we talked about. And then part three was that they would move to mandatory E-Verify for agriculture, so that if you were hiring people in the future, you would know, guaranteed, that they had proper work authorization because they're checking Social Security databases, Homeland Security, they're pinging them in real time on the computer so that you would know the person in front of you was work authorized. So this kind of three-part system to kind of recognize the reality now, but kind of move toward what they see the future being, where it's going to be legal. And then to the extent people wanted to come here, they would have the ability to, but they would keep their home citizenship and be able to travel on that basis.
Well, let's talk about some more numbers. So we talked about 458.7 billion state and local taxes that are paid in 2018. And that's by foreign-born workers. But of that, say, 458 billion, 11.74 billion a year come from undocumented workers. That's a lot of money. It's 7 billion in sales and excise taxes, and 3.6 billion in property taxes, 1.1 billion in personal income taxes. And this is what funds our schools, our highways, our services, right? So they estimate that if we legitimized or legalized the status of a number of these people, that revenues would increase to 2.18 billion annually if undocumented aliens were given legal status. That's a lot of money. I just keep thinking about that. But nobody ever looks at it from that point of view. That is what seems frustrating to me. You get people on a bandwagon that say, oh my God, this is horrible. You see these horrible crimes committed by undocumented workers or people who've been deported. And yet look how much money we could be losing. And another, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was going to say that I think that's one, the two of the misperceptions are, what you mentioned, that there's a higher rate of criminal activity and a lower rate of tax paying. And studies that we've seen are actually quite the opposite, that people that are here without status are very careful not to interact with the law. And so they tend to commit crimes at a lower rate than the community at large, and tend to keep their noses clean and pay taxes, particularly even to things like payroll taxes, which are going to go to something like Medicare or Social Security, which by definition, they're never going to be able to take advantage of. So they are paying as they go. So people that are drawing checks from that now, it's not just the money that they put in when they were young and working. The money is going out in real time, dollar in, dollar out. So people that are working now without status are actually paying for current U.S.-born retirees to get those benefits.
Well, funny you should say that, Chris, because if immigration were cut by 50%, Social Security would lose 1.5 trillion in revenue over the next 75 years. Yeah. Because they are contributing to Social Security, something which they're never, ever going to take advantage of. It's almost like they're saying, I'm coming to America. I'm going to donate this money to Social Security because I'm never going to get the benefit of it.
That's right. That's just the table stakes to be here and working, but it the result is a net, it's a big win for U.S. retirees.
And what do you think about this factoid? Americans want more immigration, not less. Over 75% of Americans oppose making cuts to our legal immigration system, and 3/4 of Americans say that immigration is good for the U.S. Do you see that around? I don't see a lot of people saying that is the problem, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you.
I think we see kind of a negative message on the news and in the media. And so I think that that's probably not reflective of what most Americans think. I mean, everyone has interacted with a foreign national that's here in non-immigrant status or has had to pursue the green card process in order to stay here. And, I think they have respect for those individuals and what they've been through, and they recognize the contributions that they make. So I guess it doesn't surprise me that, 75% of Americans support immigration and would oppose a reduction in immigration, given that we all know foreign nationals who are sponsored. All of us do.
Yeah, almost virtually everyone has there at some point in their family were immigrants. That's what's built the country. So that's why we're all here, is because of that, obviously. But the idea of that word legal in the sentence, I think, does a lot of work. And kind of what do we mean by legal immigration? I think there's too much focus on the idea of illegal immigration, but even then, it's saying it's the number of people that are trying to cross in excess of the number that are allowed. Or kind of if the system is broken to the point that even if they wanted to come here legally, it would take, 10 or depending on your country, 15, 20 years to get here. That's sort of how that works, speaks a lot to what the results are. But kind of people coming here, following all the rules, getting in, I think there is a real sense that's a win. And kind of when workers go missing because the cap has been hit for something, and so the business can't grow, that's when you notice it. We feel the absence of it every day.
The other interesting, and I love these numbers. The reason why I love these numbers because I shake my head because people don't realize what's going on. So you often hear people talk about, let's deport everybody who's here without paperwork, who's undocumented. Let's just go round them up. Well, even not thinking about the staggering moral cost to doing that, there's some interesting figures with that too. That separating millions of American families, the deportation of 11 million people would impoverish many American families and create enormous social costs. Now, that's referring to the person who's come over, has 3 or 4 kids who are U.S. born, correct? And then now the dad's being deported. What happens? These kids could become wards of other relatives, or the government now has to provide services for these kids. So it would create enormous costs. The other would, mass deportation would force $8 trillion hit to the economy over the next 14 years. And also jeopardize the housing market. And it would take the 20 years and the cost of taxpayers between 400 and 600 billion to finally, equalize this thing. I find those numbers staggering.
It's amazing. And I just wonder how many U.S. businesses would shut down if that happened.
Well, and that's, I think, be careful of what you want because you might get it. True. It's one thing to get on a social platform and say, this is what we should do, but nobody's taken into account the economic impact and the contributions. And something that really aggravates me, I don't know if you two feel this way, but when you have these people who are on the media, and especially people who are sons and daughters of immigrants, saying, oh, they should be deported. We need to tighten immigration. And sometimes I want to throw my shoe at the TV, because it's all right. You've gotten the benefit of America, the great things that our country that we all love does, but you don't want other people to have that. I mean, that's more on a personal philosophical note, but the reality of it is those people are doing more damage in the sense it's going to cost us money. Every time you have to deport somebody, it's buying an airline ticket, right? I've been on flights to Guatemala where there have been as many as 20 people who are being deported. That's airfare for everybody. And then, of course, the Guatemalan police are waiting for them at the other end. And then they find some way to get back. The numbers are definitely staggering. And the next topic is the pathway to citizenship. Once they're here, once they have the green card, we even make more money when we give them an easy path to citizenship. And yet that's very difficult because we've got the language requirement for citizenship, unless you've been here 25 years as a green card holder, or unless you're above a certain age, right?
Right.
And so simplify. Melissa, you and I do a lot of work together, but what we've noticed, for example, if we compare our immigration policy to Canada, for example, Canada has a point system.
True. And a number of countries too. And you become a permanent resident, ultimately obtain citizenship based upon the number of points that you have. And, you get points in several categories, including advanced education. So, if that type of system were implemented here, we'd have probably drastically different results for our professional foreign nationals.
Well, and you also have the ability to work for a year after getting a degree, where in Canada you can work up to 3 years for every year you're in college.
Right. So in the US, if it's in a STEM field, you have 1 year of optional practical training after you finish your degree program. And then if you have a science, technology, engineering, or math degree, you can get an additional 2 years of employment authorization for a total of 3. But again, I think the difficulty for some of these foreign nationals graduating from our US schools is that the H-1B cap is being hit every single year. So the prospect of obtaining employment and continuing on in non-immigrant status after they finish their schooling isn't certain. We've had a number of foreign nationals that weren't selected after 3 consecutive cap registrations or submissions under the cap. So it's a real challenge. And I do think that, we get a lot of value out of having these foreign nationals come to the U.S., attend our schools, pay out-of-state tuition, which is very significant, and pour money into our U.S. universities. And yet they don't have an opportunity to progress in the U.S. and obtain H-1B status after they've even completed a master's degree in their field.
Well, and Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, no, and it's unfortunate because they take those skills with them, because if they aren't able to stay here and work, then all of that knowledge that's been imparted goes somewhere else, and they will develop competing companies in another country. Whereas so immigration as sort of the solution to some of the issues rather than as a problem of itself. For example, the cap we talked about for H-2B for the temporary workers, one of the recent solutions that Congress working with the administration came up with was they would release some additional visas to kind of take some of the pressure off these employers who risk not being able to get workers. But they've targeted some of those visas to some of the countries that are sending workers here that otherwise might have come across illegally. So it's for visas for people from Haiti, from the Northern Triangle countries in Central America, the places where we're seeing the highest rates of illegal migration, kind of having an avenue for them. Look, if you want to come here and work, we can do that. We can work with you, partner with the government in Guatemala to kind of identify workers and people that can come here. And so that way they don't have to come here forever. They can come work for a while and go home. And that takes some of the pressure off the economic situation that they have at home.
Well, and it solves a problem for everybody, right? And eliminates the middleman who, are paid to sneak them over the border. Melissa, can you tell our audience what STEM means? You said STEM work.
Sure. Science, technology, engineering, or mathematics.
That's the definition of STEM.
STEM, yes.
Okay. What I like to do is I like to propose solutions, because what I've noticed, and Melissa, you can vouch for that, is with the new administration that took over, it became more difficult. The processes were simpler, now they're more difficult. So where you might get a rejection or request for additional evidence, you now have to write a brief. Chris, I'm sure you experience the same problem. You're getting more, perhaps, rejections than you were getting before, or more scrutiny than you ever got before.
It's sort of, it ebbs and flows with the change of administration. We've kind of gone back and forth, so I've been doing this back to when was it? I guess Bush or Obama, kind of. So it's swung back and forth, and so there's some variation in things that they ask for. A lot of the staff that are looking at it are career people, so they will have been there, through both sets of administrations, and so they're less ideological. But it's as much a problem that some of the bigger solutions that Congress could face aren't being done because of that back and forth. That they can't kind of coalesce around something that both sides hate or both sides like in equal measure, and be able to make the long-term changes we need, rather than kind of chasing and guessing what the people adjudicating the applications are looking for.
Well, and if you look at the process for getting here, it's more limited than other countries. You either have to have an employer who's going to hire you, but then there's a cap of 85,000, right? Lesser skilled workers, there's caps in some areas or not. If you go to college, you only get a year to work here to get some practical experience, correct? The only other way is to marry somebody, to be a superstar, to be a church minister. There's special categories for these people that come in, that they say come in, but it's really limited how you can get here. And so I would propose, honestly, is just eliminate the $85,000 cap. If we have somebody who's educated and they want to come to this country, isn't that really the kind of people we want? And on the flip side of it, don't we want people to, basically do the work that we need done? There's a funny comedian. His name is Ralphie May, and he says, if we didn't have the workers in the fields that we have, a salad would cost you $97. And are people prepared to pay $97 for a salad, right? So I think we should go on the point system.
Yeah, Rudy, that's a really good point. And I think the counter argument that I hear from a lot of folks is, well, if we eliminate the H-1B cap, then employers are only going to employ H-1B workers. And that goes back to the discussion we were having earlier. That's not going to happen. If you look at what happened to the economy back in 2007 and 2008, when we had the recession, employer sponsorship of H-1Bs declined significantly. So the economy is going to regulate that. Employers have to pay a significant amount of money to even sponsor H-1B workers. They're not going to do it in times of recession, by way of example.
Yeah, that was the same experience in the kind of the programs that didn't require that level of education. Even that the theory from opponents of it was always that, well, if you paid more, there would be more U.S. workers to do that. But kind of as the wages have gone up consistently over the last say 5, 10, 20 years. That hasn't been the case. But what has it correlated to it more precisely was the unemployment rate, or kind of the GDP growth in the US. That kind of went with a robust economy, you're going to run out of US workers. And so that need for additional workers grows. But as the unemployment rate increases or businesses slow down in general, the need dries up. And so it is moving in step with the economy at large.
Well, the point system would definitely make it more fair, right? It would make people who meet certain criteria, have certain qualifications, easily come in. And actually, it's bad for the lawyers, right? Because it means it's less expensive to process this stuff. But it's a good thing in the sense that there's still going to be work for the lawyers, but it's not going to be such a headache, right? You're not going to have, things that were simple be so complicated.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, just depending on the administration, the burdens on us vary significantly. I mean, 2 years ago, I had just one client that received over 120 requests for evidence. This is a Fortune 500 company. And it was out of control. We were seeing high rates of denials, a lot of requests for evidence.
Mm-hmm.
That's declined somewhat recently, which is good. But I do agree, if we had a point system, it would be more objective. And, if they meet the criteria, they meet the criteria.
And if they don't, they don't. I think I tend to be on the liberal side of this, although really I'm more like the numbers. This makes financial sense. In that sense, you might say, well, I'm more fiscally conservative. But, at the end of the day, if it's good for the country, why not? And we don't get into liberal and right wing. We get into, it's about the money, right? Follow the money. If everyone's going to make money doing it, then that should be the universal nonpartisan plan, right? Like, how does this benefit us? And we can even get, for another topic, what refugees have contributed, to this country. And I'm going to have as my guest a good friend of mine on a subsequent broadcast. She's an attorney for a huge Fortune 500 company who went to 4 refugee camps before coming to the U.S. It's incredible, the contributions of these people. I want to go back to the Dreamers a little bit, because there's a really interesting statistic on them. So, everyone knows, for the audience, Dreamers are kids who were here. They're not documented, but there's a stay that basically says you're not going to be deported. It keeps getting extended. That's bad for the Dreamers, because they never know if they're going to get extended. They never know if at some point they're going to be told to go back home. Well, that's not home. This is home for them, right? But in this pandemic, more than 89% of the DACA recipients are either employed and helping to boost the U.S. economy through spending tax dollars, okay? But the more moving part is 200,000 DACA recipients are serving in essential frontline roles in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. 40,000 is healthcare workers. So the person who's at the hospital working on your aunt or your uncle is somebody who's struggling to stay here in this country and never knows from 1 year to the next if that's going to be if he's going to have a place to stay here. And of course, we could lose out on 460 billion, and $1 trillion can be added to the GDP if we allow them to stay. So with all these numbers floating around, my mind boggles sometimes as to why it's such an emotional issue. And it's an emotional issue because people are making it emotional.
And I think that as an economic issue, it makes more sense. It's sort of that I think a lot of the concern is that people should play by the rules. That we're a country of laws, and if we don't enforce the laws, then what might come next? But if we can create programs to bring people here, a lot of the problems that, if you look on the front page of any day's paper, a lot of the problems you see could be solved by having people come here to do that work. That we have healthcare shortages, that, people are sick or kind of moving out of the profession or burning out. And so we need people to come. There could be a way to do that. Home health aides, there isn't really a visa program that's a perfect fit for that, but there's a great need for that as, Americans get older. Supply chain issues, kind of keeping goods in the stores. There's a shortage of, 80 to 100,000 truck drivers. There just aren't enough drivers here for as many trucks we have that we need to move things around. There are people that would do a great job of that and will be happy to do it. So, we could solve a lot of these problems just by changing it legally. I mean, we're not sort of inviting people to, go open border and say, come one, come all. But, if you can show that you're going to do things the right way and, your employer is going to take care of you, we ought to be able to find a way to do that.
And I think it would eliminate a lot of the crime that surrounds it. So, for example, marriage fraud is a big deal, right? People get married for a green card. It was what used to be called the green card. But if it's easy for a farm worker to come back and forth, what motive do you have for doing something illegal?
A lot of them have spouses at home. So they will come work here for half the year and then go home to see their wife and kids.
Exactly. I remember somebody once who was from the Attorney General's office in Guatemala. He said, very profound, he said, the more complicated you create the government bureaucracy, the more susceptible it is to corruption. And that's true. It's very difficult to get here. It's very difficult to, it takes a long time to get processed, right? And so what do people do? They think nothing about sneaking over, getting married. It's almost with, some people argue about legalizing some illegal activity, like, for example, decriminalizing marijuana. Well, if you decriminalize it, you get rid of all the crime that surrounds, that issue. And I think having an immigration policy that's more straightforward, more streamlined, as other countries do, then I think we'll eliminate a lot of the illegal activity that goes there. Melissa, any final thoughts on that for you?
I agree with that perspective. I don't know that I have any more comments to it.
Well, I want to thank you for, being on. Again, with me is Melissa Deering and Chris Schulte with Smith Gambrelle. Melissa, where are your offices located?
We're in downtown Jacksonville in the Bank of America building.
And in what states are your offices located?
So we have offices in Atlanta, Jacksonville, New York, DC, Austin, Texas, and the United Kingdom. Hopefully I didn't leave any offices off.
We have there's a Charlotte office now and Los Angeles, California as well. And
yes.
then there's a German office, I believe, too. So.
Well, thank you. I suggest that if anyone has any questions or would like to follow up with Melissa and Chris, you can go to their website, Smith Gambrelle, look them up and send them questions. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions. Chris and Melissa, thank you so much. And if you really like this interview, please click and subscribe to my YouTube channel because there are going to be a lot more great interviews like this. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Melissa.